Welcome back. Now, we have these montages playing for putting the sword away and bringing it back out, but we're not actually sticking the sword onto the back. And for that, we need a socket on Echo's skeleton on the back. We've seen how to do this for attaching weapons to the hand, so let's do this again for Echo's back. So we'll select our mesh from the character blueprint and browse to it. So I'm going to find it here, browse to that asset, and open the skeletal mesh editor, where we can click on skeleton tree and see the skeleton. Now, we want to look at the spine bones. So here's spine O1, which is right at the bottom of the spine. Spine O2 is a little higher up, but we're more interested in something up near the shoulders, so I can choose spine O5. So what I'd like to do is add a socket to spine O5. So I'm going to right-click on spine O5, add a socket, and rename the socket, and we can call this socket spine socket. And we can add a preview mesh to spine socket by right-clicking, add preview asset, and we can search for sword. And here's that sword. And it looks kind of funny. It looks like someone just shoved a sword through Echo sideways, but we can adjust this. So I'm going to go ahead and go into translation mode and move that socket back so the sword is more on the back. And enter rotation mode and make sure that I have snapping enabled before rotating the sword down like this. Now, this doesn't look much better. It's sticking straight into her backside, so we want to rotate it a little bit outward and move the socket down so it looks like it should look with a sword on the back. In fact, we can move it out a little bit more like this. Now, we should be previewing some animations to see if it's really at the right spot. So here in preview scene for preview controller, we can choose use specific animation and search for equip, and we'll choose the equip retargeted animation. So we see that that's where the sword should be, right there behind the neck. And we can scrub through to that spot right there. And it doesn't have to be exactly the same pose, but the closer we get it, the more natural it'll look. So we can move the sword roughly up to that spot. I'll go ahead and rotate it out a little bit more to roughly the same angle and sort of move it in until it's looking about right. We'll have to turn snapping off for rotation so that we can get that sword at just about the right angle here. So I'm going to play the animation and see how this looks. So I think that looks decent. We won't notice that it's not exact in the game. I'm going to also change the animation to unequip and see how this one looks. And that looks pretty good as well. So now that we have a socket and we know that if we attach a weapon to it, it's going to go right there, then we can go about seeing how to attach that weapon. And we don't necessarily have to have it exactly at that spot. We could move it down a little bit, but we'll tweak this and see how it looks in game. So let's save this. And now that we have a spine socket, let's see if we can figure out how we can attach and unattach the weapon. Now, here in the AM equip montage, we'll need a couple notifies. Now, we should start with the unequip because we already know that we're going to have that weapon attached to the hand. So as soon as we make it to about right here in the animation, we should unattach from the hand and attach it to the spine socket. So right about here is where we should do that. So I'm going to make a notify here. Let's go ahead and go to our notify section, right-click, add notify, choose new notify, and we'll call this disarm. So we can implement this in the animation blueprint by selecting this icon up here, but it says ABP Echo main states. We want to be in the main animation blueprint, ABP Echo. So I'll click the three dots and choose ABP Echo and head over to the event graph. Now here's our attack end anim notify. We want to implement our disarm notify. So I'm going to right click and type disarm and get that event, and we can go about doing something here. So what do we want to do? Well, we'd like to attach the weapon to the back instead of the hand. So let's head over into Visual Studio and see how we're attaching to the back. Well, in E key pressed, we're taking that overlapping weapon and calling equip, and equip takes a scene component, we're passing in the mesh, as well as a socket name. Let's see how that works in weapon. So here's the equip function. Now it uses the attachment transform rules struct to specify that the weapon's root component, which is the mesh, should snap to the target, welding simulated bodies together. That's that true boolean here. And then we call attach to component from the item mesh. And from there, we set the item state to equipped. Now this attaching part here, this is the behavior that we want to attach it to the back. So really these two lines here can be refactored into a function that we can call that takes a scene component and a socket name. Now if I right click and select quick actions and refactorings, we have a little menu that pops up and allows us to refactor this function. If I choose extract function, then we'll see that we can create a new function and give it its own name, such as attach mesh to socket, for example. And we'll see down here that the function signature is going to be a function that takes a useScene component called inParent and an fname called inSocketName. And if I click OK, then all of a sudden we have a new function here called attach mesh to socket. And what's better, those lines are replaced here in equip. So now that we have a function, we can reuse it. And if we go back into weapon.h with Control KO, we'll see that this new function is right here in the public section, just under equip. So that's a nice little trick that you can use to refactor functions. And now that we have this attach mesh to socket function, we can go back to /character. And we know that while we're playing the unequip montage section, our animation blueprint is going to respond to the disarm anim notify. So we can make a blueprint callable function that will attach the weapon to the spine. Let's go back to /character and make a blueprint callable function to do that. I'll place it at the bottom of the protected section. It's going to be void, and this will be our disarm function for attaching the weapon to the back. So I can call this disarm and give it a U function with blueprint callable. And I can give this a function definition. And here all we want to do is attach the weapon to the back. So that means we need our equipped weapon. And we should check to make sure that's not a null pointer. So we'll say if equipped weapon, then we'll take our equipped weapon and call our new function, which we called attach mesh to socket. So attach mesh to socket is going to need a scene component. We're going to pass in our character's mesh, and for the fname, we'll pass in an fname, and that's going to be spine socket. And it's a good idea to double check that name in our Echo skeletal mesh editor. And yes, we did call it spine socket. So that's great. We can save this and see how this works in the editor. And in the editor, with our anim notify disarm event, we can use a validated get for /character. And if it's valid, we can take /character and call that blueprint callable function disarm. Now I don't see it here, which means I'm going to need to restart the editor. In fact, hitting compile causes all kinds of hot reload errors. I can refresh these nodes here and compile, and even compiling again, attack end is having problems, so I would have to drag off of /character and call attack end. And we don't even see it there. So I'm going to need to go ahead and close out of the editor, save everything, and we'll need to compile from here in Visual Studio, as animation blueprints don't tend to play nice when adding changes from C++. So I'm going to go ahead and Control F5 from here in Visual Studio and launch the editor. Okay, so relaunching the editor, I'm going to click Open to get all my asset editors back open and go into ABP Echo. And hitting compile, I see no problems. My attack end needs me to call attack end, the blueprint callable function, so I'll get that there. And my disarm needs me to call disarm, and it's there. So everything's great. So closing the editor and opening it back up is generally the solution when you get those errors there. So I'm going to press play, grab a weapon, and press the E key. And take a look at that. That is awesome. I am actually always excited when I do something like that. It just looks great. And I do notice that it looks a little funny on the back. I think I'd like it to be off the back a little bit and maybe angled downward. It's kind of angled out a little too much, but no problem. We can just go back to our skeletal mesh editor and search for our spine socket and choose that and simply rotate it a bit. I'm going to rotate it outward like this. I think that looks better. And of course, I can play test and see how this looks. There's a little bit of a jump, so it might be a little too far out, but ultimately this is just tweaking at this point. You really just want to tweak it until it looks right, and you need a balance between the transition when you're attaching it and when you're running around in the world, you want it to look good as well. So this is a great first step to disarming the weapon, but when we pull the weapon back out, it doesn't go back onto the hand. Well, that's easy. All we need to do is go back to our equip montage and make a new anim notify for when pulling the weapon back out. So that's going to be right about here where we want to attach the weapon back to the hand. So we'll make a new notify. So in the notifies bar and the one bar, we're going to right click, add notify, new notify, and call this one simply arm. And rather than going into the animation blueprint and implementing this, I'm going to simply close out of the editor. I'm going to learn from my first mistake and close out and make that blueprint callable function first, and then compile and launch and implement it then. So back in /character, here's disarm. We can make a void arm function and make this blueprint callable. Just like that. And we can implement arm. So let's go ahead and create the definition. And this one's going to be similar to disarm. The only difference is we're not attaching to spine socket, but we're attaching to the right hand socket. And I believe we called it right hand socket. There it is. Perfect. So we'll copy the interior of disarm, paste it in arm, and change the socket name to right hand socket. And that's all we need to do. So I'm going to Control F5 to compile and launch the editor. And with the editor open, I can click open to get my asset editors back and go into ABP Echo. And now if I right click and type arm, I can get my event anim notify, not disarm, but arm. There it is. And I can get a validated get. So duplicating that node and dragging off, I can type arm, and there's my blueprint callable function arm. So it's generally a good idea to close the editor and reopen it before implementing these blueprint callable functions in response to anim notifies. So let's see how this works. I'm going to press play, grab a weapon, and hit the E key, and we put the weapon away and press the E key again, and we pull it back out, and everything looks great. Now this is awesome, but what happens if we're running and we press the E key? Well, we're sliding again, and if we pull it back out, we're sliding as well. So we do want to stop running if we're equipping and unequipping a weapon, which means we should probably set one of our enum states while we're doing this, because if we're doing this, we don't want to be sliding. So here's what we can do. In E key pressed, we're checking can disarm and can arm, and then we're playing the equip montage. So really we can have a state for when we're playing the equip montage, either the unequip or the equip section. So in character types, in our action state, we have unoccupied, we have attacking. We can add another state for when we're equipping or unequipping a weapon. And we can simply call this EAS, equipping weapon. And we'll go ahead and set the display name to equipping weapon. And as soon as we start playing the equip montage, we can set that action state. So we'll say action state equals E action state equipping weapon. And we'll do this whether we're playing the unequip montage section or the equip montage section. So now we have this equipping weapon state, which means our movement functions, move forward and move right, they're checking the action state, but they're just making sure we're not attacking. But now we can just see if we're unoccupied, which means we're not attacking and we're not equipping a weapon. So we can change this to not equals E action state unoccupied. If we're not unoccupied, we'll return. And we'll do this for move forward, and we'll do this for move right. So this unoccupied state is really useful. It means we're not doing anything that should prevent us from moving or doing other things. And our attack function checks it as well. It uses can attack, which makes sure that we're unoccupied before we try to attack. So that's very useful. Now that does mean we should set our action state back once we're finished arming and disarming. In other words, our equip montage should have a notify at the end so that we can get back out of the equipping weapon state and back into unoccupied. So let's make an anim notify. Right here, I'll right-click, add notify, new notify, and I'll call this finish equipping. And we'll add this notify to the end of the equip state, and I'll copy and paste it at the end of the unequipped state and save and close out of the editor, and we can make a blueprint callable function to reset the action state. So in /character, let's make another blueprint callable function called finish equipping. It'll be blueprint callable, and we'll implement this function. And all we need to do is set the state back to unoccupied. So we'll say action state equals E action state unoccupied, and that's all we need to do. So Control F5 to compile. We'll launch the editor again, and I'll open up my asset editors again. And back in the animation blueprint, we can implement our new notify, finish equipping. We'll get a validated get for the character, and we'll call our new blueprint callable function finish equipping. And then we should be able to run and move again. So compiling this and pressing play, we'll grab a weapon, and as I'm running, I'm going to hit the E key and I stop running. And once I'm finished, I can run again, and pressing the E key to get this sword back out, I stop running. And so this takes care of that movement state. Perfect. So this is great. And these enum states are extremely useful because they prevent us from doing anything we shouldn't be doing, such as attacking when we shouldn't or equipping when we shouldn't. In fact, if I swing the sword and I try to press the E key, I can't actually put my weapon away until I'm finished with that attack animation. And that's great because these animation notifies have montage sections, and at the end of those sections, we're resetting our states, and those need to be reached. We can't just interrupt our montages with equipping and unequipping because that would prevent us from hitting those anim notifies and resetting our states properly. So states are important in video games as they can enable or disable certain behaviors. And now that we can pull the weapon out and start swinging, we can put the weapon away and be able to do other things. This is great, and we're one step closer to being able to engage in combat. Excellent. Great job. I'll see you in the next video.